Who Jumbo Espresso Talk Today community. It's Amma Robin here. Aquaba to the show. Welcome to Espresso Talk Today. And thank you so much for joining us today for this uncommon conversation. Today, the Espresso Talk Today team is meeting again with Ms. Leslie Jones, founder and director of the groundbreaking website, the100.7.org. That's the100-7.org. This is the second part of a two-part meeting with Leslie Jones about historically Black colleges and universities. As I said, Leslie Jones is the founder and director of the 100.7.org website that discusses all of the 107 historically Black colleges and universities, whom we lovingly call the HBCUs. The website also discusses their history and their academic and extracurricular programs, as well as special and unique offerings. That's why I call it a groundbreaking website. It's a one-stop shop, and it's so easy to use and so welcoming. You can learn so much. Leslie Jones is a double HBCU grad herself. Howard, for both her bachelor's and master's degrees in history. But we didn't spend all the time talking about the bigger HBCUs like Howard and Texas Southern and Florida A&M. Leslie Jones also discussed the Tiny Titans, as they're called on the 107.org website. The Tiny Titans are small HBCUs that are making a big impact, a huge impact, in fact, and Ms. Jones talked a lot about that. We also discussed affordability. That's another big issue. And we discussed the process of choosing a college. So many of us chose a school because of its ranking, or its proximity close to home, or because our friends went there or are going there. But Leslie Jones pointed out that you should consider something more important. Consider a school where you will feel welcomed and valued and respected, as well as a school with the right academic program for you. We are so fortunate that Ms. Jones agreed to have another espresso with us, and that she was so generous with her time, because not only does she have the extensive knowledge and experience with HBCUs, she also has a real passion and respect for our historically Black colleges and universities, and I know that rang through in our last discussion, and it definitely did in this one. Remember last week, she said about attending an HBCU, and this is a quote, you leave it thinking that there's nothing that Black people cannot do. As you know, that quote really struck me and stuck with me, because that's not the feeling that I had after graduating from my university. I did not attend a school that worked to instill confidence or respect or dignity, as well as provide a superior education and great skills. Look, I'm not going to name names, but I went to actually, now I'm thinking about it, 3 predominantly white institutions, PWIs, and they provided the education and the skills. But the confidence that I graduated with was developed in spite of, rather than because of, the university that I attended. And that really says a lot. Remember that long list of successful Black leaders who had graduated from an HBCU that I read last week? I know it went on and on and on, but it was important for me to get those names out. And it was a long list, but it was definitely not complete. There are many, many, many more names that I could have added to that list. And by the way, if you haven't listened to last week's show, in which I introduced the HBCUs, or rather Leslie Jones did, then I strongly encourage you to do so. Stay with us now. But remember to listen to that show. I promise you won't be disappointed. In this week's show, Leslie Jones will provide more information about attending an HBCU. She'll discuss the importance of culture and community at HBCUs. She'll discuss the LGBTQ plus communities at HBCUs and the resources available to these communities. And, and she's going to discuss a Republican senator who is a strong supporter of HBCUs. Yes, there is one, and you're going to want to hear that person's name. I also asked her, and I asked you too, which president provided the most funding for the HBCUs? Was it Obama? Was it Trump? Or is it Biden? Do you have the answer? It doesn't really matter. Leslie Jones will discuss these issues and she'll answer that question too. Asante Sana for joining us again, community. Really appreciate it. Let's go straight to this uncommon conversation already in progress.
And I'm curious then, because I imagine there are probably two levels of skepticism that you may need to address. First, the concept of maybe someone attending an HBCU in the first place. Sometimes people are skeptical towards that idea. But then not only that, a smaller HBCU, which can seem really obscure. So
Right.
how do you not necessarily convince people, but show them that, look, you aren't going to be in like the boonies or anything like that. Like this is going to be a normal situation for you. How do you bring people to that place?
So I collect data. I'm a data person, and I tell people all the time that if I tell you something, it's because I've looked it up. I'm not just making stuff up off the top of my head.
Yeah.
And while the reason that I am convinced that HBCUs are wonderful is because I had the data to back it up. So that's the bottom line. So when I tell you about these different schools, whether it's Oakwood or Tougaloo or Fisk, which a lot of people know about Fisk, just because of the history of the school, or Dillard, that if I give you the list of alumni, then I think that should be the easiest thing for me to let you know that this is why I'm telling you this. They produce all of these people. And so I'm not making it up saying, oh, you should go there, it's a good school. No, I have a list of alumni to prove that this is what they've been doing. Yeah. So that's my bottom line. Yeah, a lot of people think you have to go to a name brand school, a school that gets a lot of recognition. And there are reasons behind that, I get it. But in terms of the output, and like I said, I collect the information, and I can give you a list on any HBCU and let you know people who went there that are successful. And that's my bottom line. I can probably shoot down just about any argument for any school why you shouldn't go there and give you a list and say, but this person went there. And look at what they're doing. They're the CEO of this company. They're doing this. You want to go be on television? Okay, we'll find schools that will help you do that. So.
Yeah. Oh.
To be okay.
Okay, one thing I read was that under Obama, which was really disappointing, not so disappointing or surprising under Trump, that the HBCUs were really underfunded. What's happening under Biden? Has that changed?
So it's not a black and white statement. So first and foremost, HBCUs have been underfunded for a century. Like, that's just the bottom line. I just posted an article yesterday about Lincoln University in Missouri, and how as a land grant college, the state is supposed to match its federal funding every year. It hasn't been doing it for Lord knows how long, and it's not going to happen again this year. Tennessee State, there was an article that ran about them earlier this year about how they've been underfunded by at least $500 million. The governor is proposing to give them, I think, $250 in the next budget, but that's still less than half of what they're actually owed. And then earlier last year, the end of 2020, there was a settlement with Maryland's HBCUs, which are all public. They sued the state. It was a lawsuit that lasted for a decade. And the state finally agreed to pay them $577 million, which, again, if you see that Tennessee State is owed $500 million by the state, and that's one college, the state of Maryland owes their four way more than that $577 million. Wow. So long been underfunded. It doesn't matter who is in charge of the state. It doesn't matter who is in charge of the federal government. They've consistently been underfunded. Recently, there's just been more conversation around it. So there was a lot of pushback under Obama. There were some things that happened under Obama's leadership in terms of funding for HBCUs that was not great. I will not say that he was a big advocate for HBCUs, which is why when I talk about what would have happened had he gone to Morehouse or Howard instead of Columbia, his understanding of the impact of HBCUs, I think, would have been greater than it was had he not been educated in Hawaii and at Ivy League schools. But that aside, so there were some things that happened, like they changed the funding, the formula for who was able to get Parent Plus loans. And the reason that they did it is understandable. It had to do with people's ability to pay back their student loans. And of course, we're having this conversation about the debt that people are accruing for school. And so they don't want to have people taking on more loans than they can afford to have, which is understandable.
Yeah.
But the problem is that when they changed it, it had a huge impact on African Americans, an outsized impact on African Americans. And since it had an outsized impact on African Americans, that also had an outsized impact on HBCUs. So you had a dip in enrollment because a lot of people could not afford to be in school at that time. So there was some problems that happened, and they came back and rectified it, but it had an impact. And then when Trump came in, he made a lot of grandiose promises. And so so I don't want to say there was necessarily an increase in funding. There was a huge conversation around this legislation that passed that brought an influx of money to HBCUs. But what didn't get covered was the fact that it was a law that legislation that lapsed. And so it had already been legislation passed. It lapsed under him, and then they got it back. So it wasn't like it was all this new money that was coming in. That really wasn't the case. It was money that was supposed to have been there in the first place, and it wasn't there. So there's, unfortunately, I don't know that we've ever had a huge advocate in the White House for HBCUs. What's going on now, of course, is that Biden made a lot of promises. And unfortunately, as we know how the United States government works, one person can't decide everything. And I can't say unfortunately, that's a good thing that one person can't make all the decisions. But at the same time, we're dealing with a Congress that is basically gridlocked.
Yeah.
And so people who are more willing to do certain things are not always in the majority, or if they're in the majority, it's not enough of a majority so they can just say, okay, let's go ahead and get this funding. Even though the majority of HBCUs are located in the South and most Southern states have Republican senators, it's just been a mix. So we're just kind of in this holding pattern right now. A lot of schools were able to get money through the CARES Act to help pay student debt and pay for things that way. So they got a lot of money through that program. And there have been increases and things like that. So we'll see. But right now it's gridlock. Congress is just really not getting a lot done. I do think there are a lot of members of Congress, like I said, because HBCUs are in the South. And so legislators always want to say they did things for their constituents. So there is definitely a desire on the part of some Republican members of the Senate and the House of Representatives to make sure that they're supporting their HBCUs. Tim Scott is one. He's wishy-washy on a lot of things, but he's definitely supportive of it because there are quite a few HBCUs in South Carolina. So he's definitely an advocate for HBCUs. And then there's Congresswoman Alma Adams, who is in North Carolina. She is the co-founder of the Congressional HBCU Caucus, which is bipartisan. And so they work to push for programs and funding for HBCUs. So there are people in Congress that are supportive. We just need a little bit more of a push to get them moving along. Say, look, if you don't want to pass this budget, let's just put some money aside for HBCUs and push that through. So you can say you did that, and then we'll see what else we can do. But there's definitely people in Congress that are concerned. There are a lot of members of Congress who are HBCU graduates, including actually a gentleman who is, I don't know how to pronounce his last name. He's a white Republican from Missouri who graduated from Lincoln University in Missouri and is a member of Congress.
Really?
Interesting.
So I actually tagged him yesterday. Yeah, I tagged him yesterday in my post about Lincoln because I'm like, this is your alma mater. Let's get this funding taken care of.
But then,
So yeah, and there are some people who are. Go ahead, Ben.
oh, sorry, no, go finish your thought. Sorry, no, yeah, you, go ahead. It's all right.
Oh no, I was just gonna say there are some. When you look through different stories, there's a governor of North Carolina who attended North Carolina Central School of Law.
Yeah.
There's a former governor of Louisiana who attended Southern University Law School. And so these are white people. There's been at least one member of Congress from Delaware that attended Delaware State University. So there are people who have been in positions of power who are white that attended HBCUs. So hopefully, we can get more of them to say, look, let's, this is a worthy cause. Let's make sure we're supporting the education of young people, because obviously there's so many careers now. You have to have a college degree. Yeah. So support these schools, and we're less expensive than most of these other schools anyway. So you get a bigger bang for your buck.
Yeah.
So it's funny when people talk about Obama versus Trump when it comes to HBCUs. Not really a great conversation one way or the other.
Disappointing.
Neither one of them were huge, huge supporters. And Donald Trump's thing is more about talk than actual production. So, it was, again, it's part of why I do what I do is because I want more people to really know about the impact of HBCUs. And I think the more people understand it, the more willing they are to support the work that's being done on those college campuses. And so I think if we had a little bit more push with Obama to say, look, let's get this done. He's in a weird position anyway, though. When you're the first Black person in this position, it's kind of hard to get stuff done. People look at you and say, oh, because I would listen to C-SPAN, and there would be people calling and swearing he was giving Black people checks like every week. Like, oh my gosh. He's doing all this stuff for Black people. And we're like, where are you getting this from? So it's, in a weird predicament there. So I get it, but I also know that there's some things that I think he could have done a little bit better when it comes to historically Black colleges and universities.
Yeah. And then so you mentioned actually a lot of very interesting things, and of course the issue of white people going to HBCUs is something we plan on getting to also. But also, given the funding issue, would you say that there are certain advantages and disadvantages of attending an HBCU? And if so, what would you say that they are?
You mean just related to funding, or just?
Well, in general.
Okay.
So in my opinion, the biggest disadvantage would be money. Like if you don't have the money to pay for it, but I mean, obviously that's going to be the case anywhere. I certainly understand the argument where you have someone who may really want to attend an HBCU, and the only school that really pays for everything is a historically white college. I get that. And that does happen from time to time. But at the same time, and I can't tell anybody what to do with their money, but I think you have to balance. One of the conversations I have when I'm talking to parents is that free isn't always free. You could choose to send your child to a college because you don't have to pay any money, but your child might be paying with their spirit. And that's the worst thing that you want to pay with. I have a friend, we've had this conversation about her daughters, because she and her husband both went to Howard. They're very successful. And so they put their children in these private schools. And we were having conversations about this before, because I'm an educator, before her daughters went to school, about public versus private. And so they made the decision to put them in private school. And so the oldest daughter's now at an HBCU, but she said at one point when her daughter was maybe a junior in high school, she basically started telling her about some of the experiences and how it wasn't great. And so she was hurt. Like, you think you're doing the best for your child, providing them with these opportunities, but then you come back later and realize that you really crushed their soul. with this situation. And so I told, you have to really weigh that. Now, that doesn't mean that going to a historically white college is going to do that, because they're not all the same. Your child could end up at one where there are people there pushing them and working with them and making sure they're going to thrive and be successful. But you have to make sure that that's where you're putting your child, not that you're just going with the school that's giving you the most money so that you have the least amount of debt. Because if you're, it's one thing to come out where you don't owe Sally Mae, but then the rest of your life you've been hurt and scarred by that experience.
Yeah.
It's not good. You really have to weigh both sides of it. So to me, at the end of the day, if I have to pay any money, my money's going to a historically Black college. It's not going to a historically white college, because I know that the people there are going to be invested in my children. And that's the most important thing for me. I want my children in an environment where they're going to thrive, where the people who are around them are going to have their best interest at heart and be dedicated to making sure that they grow up and be not just productive members of society, but actually good Black men and women. That's what I want my children to be. And I want to make sure the people that are around them are concerned about that as well. And I know that they can get that on an HBCU campus. And so I'm always, if you're looking at a historically white college, make sure that your child is going to have that environment there, that there are going to be some mentors there, some people that are going to look out for them. Because again, it might be free in terms of your checks, but if at the end of the day, it wasn't free in any other way, it's not a good experience. And there's only 4 or 5 years your child is going to get for this. And after that, it's really launched into the real world. And so you want those years to be the best that they can possibly be for your kids. So for me, I don't think there are too many negatives overall. I mean, there are going to be some things that might not necessarily be great. Like, maybe the dorm might not be that great. It might be really fancy at this other school, but that's like the least of your concerns, in my opinion. You want your water to run, but outside of that, it's not like, if you have to, my friends and I joke about this. One of my girlfriends went to Spelman and her children are at Howard now, and her daughter was in a newer dorm and her daughter's friend was in an older dorm. And so his laundry room was like on the basement, whereas her newer dorm had laundry rooms like throughout the building. And she was like, oh, it's so bad that he only has this one laundry room in the building. And her friends were like, what? The guys that went to Morehouse were like, we didn't even have a laundry room on campus.
Yeah.
So that, those types of things are like, okay, that not really that big of a deal. I remember we didn't have air conditioning in the dorm my freshman year. It was hot. We had a screen in the window and I stayed on the 4th floor. So it was hot, but at the end of the day, that's not a reason not to go to a school. Everything else about it was great. We look back at those situations and laugh about it.
Did you see
not
that
a big deal.
Did you see that episode of The Last OG where the daughter was trying to decide, she's going to go to Hampton or go?
No, I haven't watched it, but I do know she's right. I've seen the clips because I know Hampton. I think one of their writers went to Hampton as well, which is how Hampton got in their show. I love seeing that. So I've only seen, I think, the first season of that show. And I've just seen the clips because it had Hampton in it. So I know that they were discussing it. But yeah, so to me, the pros of going to an HBCU will always outweigh the cons, always. If you have to pay, I figure, like I said, it's better to pay to put your child in an environment that's going to be supportive than put them somewhere else that's not. There are a lot of kids that leave school and it was free because they were miserable. So you definitely don't want that.
Well, I do think, I do know that the Black community is not a monolith. And, we have a lot of different, interests. And I mean, there's the Black disabled. I mean, there are all these different interests that we have. What about the LGBTQ community?
Good question.
Yeah, how is that in an HBCU?
So it's probably going to depend on the school.
Okay.
But I think, so traditionally HBCUs are conservative. A lot were established by the church, and the Black community as a whole tends to be conservative when it comes to marriage, things like that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But having said that, I think pretty much every Black family knows that there's gay people in your family. And so It's like, it was one of those things, kind of like the don't ask, don't tell kind of conversation for many years. But now, when you look at young people and they're more free with expressing themselves and expressing who they are, the environment on campus has changed. There are definitely going to be some interactions that young people who are LGBTQ will find on a HBCU campus. That's not to say that it's going to be with everyone, but there can be some I've seen some posts where there's been some negative experiences on different campuses, but then I also see over time how it's changing, and it's gotten to the point where most people are like, we don't care, Yeah. That's your life, this is my life, whatever. And I think more and more it's pretty much getting to that point on most campuses, where, with the exception of some that are extremely, extremely religious, and there's only a handful of those that are, even those that maintain a relationship with the church are still not necessarily that conservative. They're not that concerned with somebody's bedroom activities. There's only a couple that probably will be. The rest of them are just like, go live your life. And there are more, I think the Human Rights Campaign has a program that's starting to work with HBCUs to make sure there are programs on campus. There are several campuses that have started organizations and have not just organizations, but offices on campus specifically for that community to provide support and make sure they have the resources that they need. So over the past 5 or 6 years, I've definitely seen a change in what's been happening on campuses, and they're being more open and more supportive, specifically, because I can't say they weren't open in the first place. It's not like they were going to tell you couldn't be there, but more supportive, definitely more support being provided to students.
That's fantastic.
Excellent. Yeah. And what about these bombings? These bomb threats?
Yes. So that's been pretty interesting. And I think yesterday, Spelman, Clark Carolina, they had another threat yesterday, if I'm not mistaken. So that's been very interesting because, you're wondering who's behind it. And of course, they say that there's these juveniles that were behind it, which on the one hand makes you think, okay, well, maybe that's better because it was just a prank. They thought they were being funny. But then on the other hand, it's still concerning because you have these juveniles that perhaps are filled with hate. And the reason that they, even though they might have thought it was funny, decided to terrorize other people because they decided to terrorize a group of Black students. So that's concerning that you have young people that took it to that extreme. It's not as if bomb threats are unusual. People have done them and actually, meant absolutely nothing behind it. They just thought it was funny. It was a joke. Even though, of course, we know now that we need to take it seriously because places have been bombed. But in the Black community and the history that we've had in this country, it's a challenge to get a bomb threat and think, oh, it means absolutely nothing. I mean, we have a whole entire Black community in Tulsa, Oklahoma that was bombed, and destroyed. Right. Then of course we know that we have churches throughout the South that were bombed. My husband is from Birmingham, and his family church is a national, not 16th Street, is a I can't even remember the name of the church right now, but Fred Shuttlesworth was the pastor of the church, and so his aunt was in church one Sunday when it got bombed. Wow. So we have this history that doesn't make us think, oh, it's just a bomb threat, let me laugh it off. Especially when it's in such wide numbers and it's occurring more than once. It's across the country just at HBCUs. It's not as if somebody called Georgetown and called it a bomb threat and Howard. It was just Howard. It was just UBC. So it wasn't Johns Hopkins, it was just Morgan and Coppin State. So clearly someone is looking specifically at HBCUs to terrorize, and that's what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, thinking back to the civil rights movement, so many bomb threats and actual bombings, many bombings. And
Exactly.
We have to take that seriously. I mean, Dylan Roof, what was he, 21 when he walked into a church and shot up, 9 people.
Exactly, shot up a church.
Yeah.
Yep. Very much so. So it's one of those things where our community looks at it and you're not sure how to take it. You're not sure how to take it. You don't know if it's serious, if it's, just something that somebody was doing just because they thought it was funny or what. So fortunately, I hope that these 6 people that they say they know who they are, they've identified. I hope that's all that it was. and that they're able to prosecute them. The last I read, they said they were looking at it as a hate crime. So, and it is, it's an act of terrorism.
Absolutely.
And especially when you know the history of Black people in this country, it's definitely an act of terrorism to threaten people, an entire school with bombs. And even, a lot of people are not aware of this. There have been cases on HBCU campuses with arson historically. There are some schools that had to shut down because they were burned and they were never able to recover. And then you have other incidents with, yesterday was the anniversary of the Orangeburg massacre, where law enforcement shot and killed students on the campus of South Carolina State University who were protesting segregation. So we have this history in this country of Black people trying to get an education and being targeted.
Yeah.
So it's definitely something that we look at, and at the very least, we're cautious.
Yeah. These days, actually, always for Black people, we have to always be extra cautious.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Okay, we're going to have to wrap up soon, but I want to go back to the 107.org. Now, person's thinking about an HBCU versus I was thinking of them as a white university, but you call it historically white, which I think very, very interesting.
Historically white, yeah.
Yeah. Where do they start? How does the website help them? Where should they start there?
So there's a couple of things. The first thing I would suggest they do is go on the website and see where it says Match Me, because we have have a database. It's the first of its kind that has literally every academic program offered by every HBCU. And that means that whether it is a professional program, whether it is an associate's degree, a technical program, because the HBCUs offer the entire range, you can find it on there, and it will tell you which HBCU offers it. So that would be the first thing. Find out which school offers the programs that you have. And then from there, you start looking into that to determine, find out more about the programs. Then you can figure out, maybe I want to go to a small school. So then you go to my Tiny Titans page and get information about there to see if any of those schools overlap. Maybe you want to go to a school that has a religious focus, because I have a feature on there that talks about schools where they put an emphasis on religion.
Yeah, so Match Me, and then that database. Very interesting. And then you can decide if you want to go to a small school.
So you use the database, and then
go ahead.
Right, one that has a religious focus, you can do that, because I did a feature on those. So the features that I post on there are designed to help make your selection easier. So outside of course, finding the academic match, you want to make sure you're finding an actual fit for you. Yeah. And so that's why I highlight those HBCUs that are smaller, because some people want to be on a small campus. Or I had a woman who reached out and was just like, I want to know more about, I want to be on a campus where Christianity has a good, is supported. So I said, okay, there's plenty of HBCUs. Let me give you this information. And so that's why I did that research, to show how there are different HBCUs that, at least if you're a Christian, that there's campuses that you can be on that really have that focus. Now, if you're not a Christian, there are other schools, of course. Well, I shouldn't say other schools. Most schools have chaplains of different religious backgrounds that will support you as well. But that focus was on Christianity. And if you're into the arts or whatever else it is, so I try to find those, try to highlight those schools. And then, of course, if your focus is financial and that finances are going to drive your decision, I've done a few features on those. So there's a feature that talks about the most affordable private HBCUs, the most affordable public HBCUs. One of the things I hate to hear is HBCUs are expensive. I'm like, first is relative, because there are people who can't afford to write a check to Spelman to pay that $50,000 tuition and room and board and all the extra fees without blinking an eye. Then you have people who, if they have to pay $500 a year, it's a struggle. So it's all cost is relative, expensive is relative. But even outside of that, when you compare the cost of an HBCU, just the sticker price, to its comparable historically white college, the HBCU is going to be less expensive. If you compare Howard to Georgetown, American, Howard's half the cost. If you compare Morehouse or Spelman, and those are the schools that people are talking about when they say they're expensive, it's always Howard, Hampton, Morehouse, Spelman, because those are the most expensive. But if you compare Morehouse or Spelman to Emory, Morehouse and Spelman are cheaper.
Okay.
So I, focus on those, which schools are the most affordable. And then I also have a feature on the website that talks about which HBCUs you could pay for if you had a minimum wage job. So if you had to pay, work your way through school, and then maybe your mom or dad might take an extra job, minimum wage to pay it so that you don't really graduate with a lot of debt. Which HBCUs can you cover your tuition by working a minimum wage job? And so that would mean you work 40 hours a week during the summer and 15 hours a week during the school year. Because I figure 15 hours is pretty reasonable. You might work 6 on Saturday, then you just got to split up the other 9 during the week. It's pretty reasonable to manage. And there are some HBCUs where you can do that because the tuition is low enough and the minimum wage is high enough to manage that. And most of that, of course, there's some private schools on that list. The majority of them are public. So you have to look at whether or not you can qualify for in-state tuition. So that's something that has to be managed. But there are quite a few HBCUs, and I did a feature on this as well, where they will waive your out-of-state fees. So if you live in Michigan, you don't have to feel that you have to go to school in Michigan because of the out-of-state fees. There are some schools that will waive them, and there are a couple of schools that don't have them public schools that don't have them at all. Jackson State's out-of-state fees, I think, are like $1,000 a year. Which would still be cheaper than if you were to go to University of Michigan, which is pretty expensive. Alcorn State and Mississippi Valley State in Mississippi neither one of them have out-of-state fees. So if you're coming from California, and I looked this up because I didn't realize it, state of California's public schools are really kind of pricey. So if you have a student that wants to go to Berkeley, in-state can still cost them $30,000 a year.
Yeah.
Yep.
Whereas they could go to Mississippi, they could go to Louisiana, get in-state tuition at Southern, or get in-state tuition at Grambling or Jackson State or one of these other schools are much lower, and it's still going to cost less money. So making sure people know about that information, I think, can help them with their decisions, because the idea, a lot of times people think, well, in-state's going to be less expensive. And for many people it is. But there are ways to get in-state tuition at an HBCU. Sometimes it's based on grades. Sometimes it's based on your proximity. So certain schools have a radius. Like if you live within so many miles of their school, then you're eligible for in-state tuition. Some have relationships with like their neighboring states. So if you live in a neighboring state, you can get in-state tuition. Sometimes it's based on your GPA. Sometimes it's based on your major. I think Grambling, if you're a member of an athletic team or a cheerleader or a student government, they'll waive your out-of-state fees. Certain schools like Alabama A&M has a scholarship that it will give students to have a certain GPA that will cover their out-of-state fees. So there are a wide variety of ways to get that covered. And then if you're able to work during the summer at a minimum wage job, and then during the school year, you can get a lot of your fees covered that way. And I think there are a lot of people who don't realize that. They think that there's no way I'm going to be able to afford school. And there are definitely lots of challenges that are there. But for a student who is Pell Grant eligible, so they get the maximum, which I think is like $6,500 or something like that a year. And then they work. So there's schools that will cover your tuition by working that minimum wage job. Your tuition is paid. Then you get your Pell Grant that'll cover a lot of your room and board. So then you don't have even if you have to graduate with some debt, it's probably going to be the equivalent of a car note versus something that's versus a mortgage. So it's a huge difference, but it's getting that information out there and knowing it is what makes the biggest difference. And there are just, unfortunately, a lot of people who don't realize that. For those who live in the state of Maryland, because Maryland and DC both have a higher than average minimum wage, the public schools in Maryland, a student can go to and essentially work, like I said, and their tuition is completely covered because the minimum wage is higher. A student in New York who wants to go to a school out of state, if they work during the summer, because New York has a higher minimum wage, they're able to get a lot of their expenses covered that way. And then they might go to a state where the minimum wage is lower, but it's offset by what they earn during the summer as well. So there's lots of different ways to cover it. People 40 years ago, you hear stories a lot about people working their way through school, and you hear it a lot less now, but it's not impossible. There are certain schools that it's going to be, you're not going to do it at Spelman. You're not going to do it at Howard. Howard, you can get a lot of your fees paid because DC's minimum wage is high, but you're not going to cover everything at a Howard. But there are other HBCUs outside of Howard where you can get that done. And so I put that information out there. I want my website to be a resource that that benefits people, and that they're able to go on and find the HBCU for you, because I truly believe that there is one for everyone that will take you, that will get you where you need to be, that you can, figure out how to pay for and all of that. And there's definitely one that will work for you. It might not be Howard, and that's okay.
And that's okay, because there have 106 others, or about that.
Others. We're looking at it.
Yeah, and well, the last question is, I wonder how can we help? I mean, can we, donate to the United Negro College Fund? I mean, how can we help, to support Black students that are struggling and that do need help with textbooks or whatever it is,
So donations always help. Every HBCU could use more money. So if you're in the United States, definitely reach out to your legislators. Let them know that you want to see HBCUs be fully funded in the way they deserve. So that means passing legislation in Congress. That means making sure your state, if you have an HBCU in your state, fully funds the HBCUs that are in that state. Outside of that, you can make a donation. You could pick an HBCU and make a donation. Or, as you mentioned, the UNCF, which supports a large percentage of private HBCUs. There's also the Thurgood Marshall College Fund, which supports public HBCUs. So there's different ways that you can provide donation. And then there's other organizations, like the Tom Joyner Foundation is still operating and giving out scholarships. So there are other organizations that give out scholarships. So supporting the organizations that are raising money for HBCUs is always something you can do. And you don't have to feel that you need to be a millionaire to do it. You have $5 a month that you're able to donate. That makes an impact. And if everybody was able to, given that $5 a month, which most people would miss at the end of the day, it can make a huge difference. Yeah. It can really make a huge difference. We got to get these HBCU endowments up to where some of these historically white college endowments are, and that will make a huge difference. When we have schools that are meets need, meaning that if you get in, whatever your need is, financial needs you have, the school is able to pay it.
Yeah.
It would be an amazing day, but it takes a lot of money. It takes a lot of money. And so hopefully we'll get more people who, you have people who, Mackenzie Scott, who gave a lot of money to HBCUs. We need more people like that who are willing to see the importance and that make that investment. There was a conversation a few years ago with Michael Bloomberg, who gave a large donation to Johns Hopkins University, which is his alma mater. Okay. I think he gave them $1 billion.
$1 billion.
Jesus.
$1 billion. He gave them $1 billion. Now he did give, I think, about $100 million maybe to the HBCU medical schools, but that's a huge difference.
That's huge.
Yeah,
it's a huge difference. And granted, you can give your money to whatever you want to give your money to. It's yours, and it is his alma mater. But Johns Hopkins is sitting on several $1 billion already.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And had he taken that $1 billion, he could have given $10 million to every HBCU, and it would have transformed some of those schools. Some of those schools have never seen $10 million. Mm-hmm. It would have made a completely different impact, spreading that money over HBCUs versus giving it to Johns Hopkins University, which has a small percentage of students of color, small percentage of students who are low income, versus HBCUs, which have majority students of color and a large percentage. Some schools are 70, 80% low income students. Completely transformed those schools. Mm-hmm. That same amount of money could have had a much larger impact at those 100 HBCUs. So getting people to understand that your dollar goes farther at an HBCU when you give it to them, because you're truly lifting up a larger percentage of people that way.
Right, and that's going to last for generations too. It's going to change and form families then. Yeah,
it definitely will. It definitely will.
Well, thank you. Wow. I mean, Leslie, this has been really great. And I mean, I've finished my espresso, but I'm going to keep going. But I know I can't. But you have been so fantastic with this information.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely. No, I mean, I'm honestly becoming very jealous of just all these experiences at HBCUs and all that. Like, it sounds incredible.
Not too late. We have grad schools.
Oh, yeah, I've been looking. But for real, thanks for all this really useful information too.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, and I've been trying not to weep over here thinking, why didn't I really consider this? And we can turn back the clock several decades, and I could do this again. But really,
Yeah. And so my goal is to prevent people from feeling that same way. We're getting, where you're not looking back thinking, Dad, I should have done it. Letting you know now, all these young people out there now. And then, of course, man, like I said, it's always grad school. It's always grad school.
Yeah, no, I've been looking, but I'm looking. I'm looking.
Well, and this is going to be really helpful to our audience, and I think that you're going to transform some minds, change some minds here. These people get people to open up and consider, the HBCU.
I certainly hope so.
The historically white to us. I just had to put that in quotations. I don't like the way that even sounds. Yeah. But thank you once again. Yeah, it's really been a pleasure meeting you, and we really want to do what we can to support you too in your work, because it's really good work you're doing.
Okay, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
So I will say I do have an HBCU week coming up. It's going to be virtual.
Okay.
February 27th through March 4th. And we're going to be live streaming every night, talking about HBCUs, talking to alumni of HBCUs, where they tell their origin story and how they went from their HBCU and through their path to, whatever it is they're doing. And these are people who are successful in STEM, law and government, entertainment, athletics, communications fields, and business, just across the whole gamut. Awesome. We're going to be talking to alumni from different schools. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Asante.
All right. Bye.
Okay, bye. I'm sorry to say, but this is the end of our discussion with Ms. Leslie Jones, founder of the 100-7.org website. Let me repeat, the 100-7.org website. This uncommon conversation is over, but I hope that the awareness and openness to HBCUs has grown and will continue to grow. First, I want to say Asante Sana to Leslie Jones for sharing her time and expertise with Espresso Talk today. She really opened my eyes up to the importance and amazing opportunities at America's 107 Black colleges and universities. At Espresso Talk today, we've been meeting with experts in psychology, medicine, and public health, and lots of other areas. They've all discussed how racism, stress, and living in an anti-Black environment have affected Black mental health and physical health. And one thing they all mentioned was how having a strong Black identity, Black culture, and Black community can support and uplift Black health and well-being, as well as Black minds. The HBCUs seem to provide these important aspects, as well as providing excellent academic programs. You heard Leslie Jones talk about how the HBCUs are producing more Black doctors and other professionals than the predominantly white institutions. There's a reason for that. There's an amazing feeling to walk into a space full of Black people who welcome you, believe in you, and support you. I know that at my PWI, my predominantly white institution, I felt that my presence was merely tolerated, though I did see how the white students were welcomed and that people believed in them and supported them. There's nothing wrong with that, absolutely nothing. But I and many other Black students that I knew didn't feel that way. But we had a right to. We had a right to, just like the white students. We felt it at the Black student unions at our school. Remember, Leslie mentioned that HBCUs were like having the whole school as a Black student union. I mean, what an incredible feeling. At HBCUs, the professors are there because they believe in the mission of educating Black students and supporting them in their studies and beyond. And the Black HBCU grads whom I've met have all talked about that feeling, and I admit it, I'm jealous. In case you're thinking that Black people are interested in HBCUs because we're trying to hide away from reality, or that we can't compete with white students, or that, maybe I feel like I'm not Black enough to attend a Black school. None of that is true. Leslie really pointed that out. None of that is true. HBCUs are not a hiding place for Black people anymore than PWIs are a hiding place for white people. HBCUs are not a place to hide. They are a place to learn, to grow, to discover, and to challenge yourself. That's the reality. And that is what all schools should be. But unfortunately, many other schools, like the PWIs, aren't always living up to that mission, not for Black students. And many times, Black people at PWIs are made to feel that they can't compete, despite all the evidence to the contrary. Let me repeat it, there's lots of evidence to the contrary that we can compete, and we do. And lastly, Leslie pointed out that Black people are not a monolith. We're a community with diverse and different backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds, different gender identities, political viewpoints, different goals, dreams, aspirations. But there's a place for everyone. Everyone fits in. So we hope that you enjoyed this discussion about the HBCUs and that you'll consider them right along with, or even before maybe, the PWIs. We also need to consider supporting HBCUs financially, as well as academically, socially, intellectually, and culturally. Leslie Jones mentioned several ways that you can provide support for the HBCUs as a group or as an individual at an individual school. For example, you can send a donation to the United Negro College Fund. That's at uncf.org. They need us. HBCUs need us as much as we need them. Let's show the support and respect that they deserve. Asante Sana for showing up today and every day, community. I appreciate you so much. I also appreciate Leslie Jones and Ben Kopanen for today's Uncommon Conversations, both of them. Then remember, send your questions or comments to me at team@espressotalktoday.com, or join us on Instagram at Espresso Talk Today or Facebook at the Espresso Talk Today podcast group. You can also find information about the 100-7.org website and the United Negro College Fund. You remember www.uncf.org. All of that's on the website. So come to espressotalktoday.com. Looking forward to seeing you next time. I'm Alma Robin at Espresso Talk Today, and I'm saying strength, soul, and reparations. Ashe.